Hey everyone, Tim from ChamferZone here. Welcome to the complete free Droid tutorial packed with modeling, unwrapping, baking and texturing action. As always, no step is left out, nothing fast forwarded and everything fully commented on. The Droid makes for the perfect object in spherical modeling, and we will also focus on the importance of color IDs as well as alpha and emissive maps later in the texturing course. I hope you'll enjoy it. Let's get started right away. Let's go over here to our customize and preferences, where I like to disable the gamma correction. It's personal choice, otherwise it brightens up the screen very much. Scene undo, I like to put it to like 120, and under files I like to have at least 20 auto backups in a 5-minute interval. Let's go over to viewport configuration, where we want to make sure that everything here is cranked up to 4K and 8x8 anti-aliasing. And then under our unit setup here, let's make sure we have it put to centimeters, and also here in our system unit setup. As a next thing, let's not forget to save our scene. And I already have a save here, which was a test. I'm just gonna start fresh now, which is BB9E as a name. Let's have a quick look here at our modifiers. You can see that I already have some in there, and we're gonna make some use of these. So if you want, you can go over to configure modifier sets and then just drag and drop these modifiers into these slots so that you have quick access to them, which might make sense. Now Alt W will make any window full screen. I am in front view, and let's drag a plane by pressing Ctrl. And that way we already have the same parameters there. Let's just drag our reference image on here. You can do that straight from the Windows folder, drag and drop. Let's pull it back here a bit on the Y-axis, and I'm gonna center X and Z by just right-clicking on these double arrows. Let's switch back here to our front view. And some Star Wars Wikipedia told me the height for the BB9E droid is 63 centimeters. So let's select a cylinder, drag it into the viewport here on front view, and let's make sure our radius is at 63. And now we can just eyeball it here, put it to the center on top of that cross here in the grid view. Alt X will make the cylinder transparent. Now let's select our plane again, and pressing R will switch it over to our scale tool, and we scale it here until we have it perfectly in the center here of that cylinder. And that way we have our relative size here determined, and we can just select that cylinder and delete it, and maybe drag that plane a little bit further back here on the Y-axis. And actually, before I go back here to the front view, let's get out of it so we have a bit of an angle here on it. And I'm selecting a box and just drag it in there. And I want to have these segments here set to 2 each. And then let's just copy and paste so that we have the same length, width and height. That way we have a perfectly uniform box here. And since we dragged that box up from the bottom, the pivot is also at the center bottom, which is perfect. And now we just place it here X, Y and Z on the 0 coordinates each. And that way we have it perfectly centered, and we can just use our scale tool once again by pressing R so that we have it perfectly here with the diameters of that cylinder we see in the background. And now we right click the box and make an editable poly out of it so that we can actually start working on it. So let's make sure we have it all centered like we did before. And now I'm going over here to our top view. I switch over to vertex mode. And while I press Ctrl, I can select multiple vertices at the same time, and then we press that connect key and do the same thing here for that section. And now let's switch over here to the front view and do the same thing here. And we also select them at the back side, so we don't have to do it twice. And now we do the same thing here at the right view. Press Ctrl and then press connect and do it also here. So now everything should be looking like that on your end. So now let's just click anywhere. So we deselect the selections that we had before. Let's go back and select all the center vertex points Again, by pressing Control, you can make multiple selections of them. And now we add our chamfer modifier on top of these active vertex point selections. And all we have to do is increase our amount here. And we also want to set it to open chamfer. So now you can see what we're up to here already. We are determining the size here in between these two rings that you see there on the reference image. Feel free to use the exact same diameters that I'm using here, or amount. That way you have the exact same result. And I'm gonna add the Turbo Smooth modifier on top, and also the Spherify modifier, which I have to select through the stack. And now we have a nice and spherical shape here that already resembles our actual reference quite a bit more than the box did. And let's remember that our pivot was originally here at the bottom center. And now we go over here to affect pivot only and center it to the object. So now it's perfectly here in the center of that spherical shape, which it has to be. Make sure you made that step. And speaking of spheres, let's select an actual sphere, drag it in here. And if it comes in like that, we gotta press on that angle button here and rotate it around 90 degrees. And now let's go on that align button and click on our spherical shape so that this new sphere is perfectly in the center. And now we bring the radius to an amount where it matches the exact same diameter of that other shape that we have. So now we make a selection for these two objects. We bring up the Scene Explorer and simply click on Create New Layer, which puts them into a new folder. We're gonna call it High Poly. Next, let's select our customized sphere, right click it, clone and copy. And let's also create a new layer for it, and we're gonna call it Low Poly. And that way we have a backup here for later for our low poly version. So we can toggle on and off here the visibility, and we just wanna have the high poly visible. Let's select our original sphere that we already did some work on and bring up the material editor. If it looks like that on your end, you can change it if you go over here to modes, and I like to have the compact mode personally, it's what I'm used to. Let's assign any material to it here. And now we can go here into the diffuse and change the color to a darker tone. We can also bring up the specular level to make it a bit glossy. Now let's right click our modifier stack here and say collapse all, and that makes it an editable mesh. Let's turn that into editable poly. And now let's go over to edge mode, double click any of these edges, which makes it a loop selection. And now we want to drag out that ring that we see there on the reference. So with that selection active, I go over to scale, and while pressing shift, we drag fresh geometry out there. And we're kind of toggling in between our scale and move tool here to align it with that sphere there in the background to make sure it's perfectly spherical. Let's create another edge loop here, again by using scale and shift. And we actually want to bring that a little bit further in here. So I'm just gonna scale it to the inside here and drag it out again. Once again, make sure it's aligned to that sphere. And with our active edge selection, we press Ctrl, and on that polygon button there, we grow the selection, we assign a new material to it, and we press Auto Smooth, and now Ctrl and I to make an invert selection, and we also auto smooth it. So now we have two different auto smooth groups here for these two segments. So next we want to have an extra subdivision level here. So let's add Turbo Smooth and collapse it and make it an editable poly again. So that gives us some more polygons to work with here. I'm gonna shrink that active selection so that we only have these two loops selected. And by pressing Alt key, we can then make some deselection here on that active selection. And I'm just gonna deselect these polygons right there and press delete. So now we're left with that shape that we also see on the reference image. And in particular, we want to be working on that silver looking ring here on the inside as the next thing. Let's take the sphere into isolation mode, and I'm gonna select border mode, and I'm gonna cap that hole that we have here. Go to polygon mode and use our inset to establish that silver ring. And I'm gonna push it a little bit more out here on the y-axis to further support that spherical look. And I want to switch over here to vertex mode because some of these guys need to be adjusted manually. So I'm gonna select them all around here, 8 of them in total. And now let's just drag it a little bit back here on the y-axis. And that way we have a nicer shape there. Let's go back to polygon mode and inset. And I'm gonna make another small inset, which I'm then dragging in here on the y-axis, followed by yet another inset. And that one we can push quite a bit in here. Let's grow our selection 3 times. And now we can select a new material, assign it, and let's just change the color here to a brighter tone so that we have this as some sort of a chrome, even if right now it doesn't actually look like chrome. Let's hit the auto smooth button here on that as well. And for now, we can delete that inner polygon that we have there, that face. We don't need that. Let's go out of isolation mode and select that sphere that we already have there in the background. And I'm also gonna apply our white chromey material here to it. And I'm gonna adjust our radius for it so that it doesn't overlap entirely here with that actual sphere. We want it to be a little bit there in the inside. And now let's make use of that sphere by giving it 100 segments as to before where I had it at 32. And now we can collapse it to an editable poly here. Now let's go to edge mode, select a vertical edge, loop it, ring it, and while pressing Ctrl, make a double click on the inner edge here. So we have these edges. Now let's add chamfer modifier and enable open chamfer and invert. And we want to remove minimum angle there, the checker mark. And now we can increase our amount here to something around here. And with that in place, we already have a nice shape here in store that resembles our reference image once again. So let's collapse that chamfer modifier. Right click and collapse to. And I'm gonna select that grid or that grill. Go over to our front view, select our polygon mode and press F3. And now I'm just gonna draw a selection here. I'm gonna draw a selection here, rectangular, and some of the polygons we can add with Control if they didn't get selected. And this one here, we don't actually need it, so I'm gonna press Alt, which does the opposite, then pressing Control, gets rid of them. And now with that selection here, we can then press Control and I to make an inverse selection and hit delete, because that is really all that we need here, these polygons. That's what you see. Now I'm adding our shell modifier. I put the outer amount to 0, or at least close to 0. We don't want it to overlap here. And the inner amount, I'm gonna push it quite a bit in here with like 1.3 centimeter thickness. And our outer amount, we can push it a little bit further out. So with that selection, we can now go over to our chamfer modifier once again. I have the quad chamfer operation here enabled. Bring that amount down, and I'm gonna put our segments to 2 and the tension to 0.5. So that is already very high poly actually. We won't even need the turbo smooth later on. That will work as our high poly already there for this grill. I don't need that selection here at the background. I'm gonna delete it with our element mode, select it and delete, because we're gonna share that later, copy it into the right place. So as the next thing, let's go over to border mode here on our sphere and select that inner edge selection here. Go to edge constraint, and now with our move tool, we can bring it a little bit further here to the front. I don't want it to be that deep in there. And edge constraint makes sure it doesn't jump out of place. And next, let's work on some of these actual details that we see here. So let's go back here to the sphere. Make sure we don't have any edge selection. So I'm just going to click in the void. Select these two here, make a ring selection and connect it. So now we can do the same thing here, make a ring selection, connect it, just for the sake of having a few extra edges to work with. So let's start with the outer ring, press Ctrl to add more edges to it. And we're gonna select these edges that are connecting here these different elements or material groups in our case. Just press Ctrl and that will add it to them. And I have my references here on the second monitor, so I don't need to look at it here in the viewport. I'm gonna add this kind of a cross here to it. But now we also have to take away from it. So we press Alt to do that. And that way we can just deselect some of these edges. We want to maintain that ring, but some of these edges need to go. So that is a good start here, but we need to add quite a few more edges to it here. Like these guys here. And also over here, I want to have some extrusion going on then. And we have to add that here manually, because if we double click it, then it would make a whole ring selection, which in that case we don't want. We just want it to go till that point. And let's add a few more details. That is preparation for the extrude operation that we're going to do in just a moment. And that will go straight into our normal map later on. So it's important to not forget any of these edges here. And there's still a few more edges that we want to add to that high poly model, like these ones here. They also form some shape there that I see on the reference image. So we just have to make sure that we add it here on the left and on the right side, but we only want to have two of them. So let me get out of isolation mode and let's select our grill once again. And I want to go, once I finally have it selected here, go to editable poly, go to element mode, select everything and push it a little bit more in here on the y-axis. Let's go back here to our sphere, have our active selection, and now it's time to extrude. That brings up that dialog here. And I'm just gonna play around here with these values until I like them. We want it to go in not too deep, but enough so that we get some nice information here once we apply our chamfer and turbo smooth modifier in just a moment. So that looks about right, maybe a little bit less here on the width, and I'm gonna confirm that. And now with that active edge selection, while pressing Ctrl, we click on polygon and auto smooth that polygon selection that results out of it. And now we can add our chamfer modifier on top, put it to unsmooth edges, and bring our amount down quite a bit. Tension, I want to have it at 0.5. And let's add our turbo smooth on top to see what it looks like. And that does indeed make it our high poly model. I'm just gonna put the iteration back to 0 for the moment, because there's still some work to be done here on that ring especially. So let's go to that selection and let's just go to editable poly mode. And we want to double click these edges, like literally there at the edges. And that will make a complete loop selection there for these ones. And once we have that for all of them, we can then bring up our chamfer dialog and make sure that thing there is unchecked where I just had the mouse. I'm gonna have it at 3 iterations. And now we can go back here, select these edges. They're in the very center of it while pressing Control. So now we have 48 edges. Convert them to polygon and auto smooth it. We need that for our chamfer modifier and turbo smooth to work. Now I go to border mode, select these edges, convert it also to polygon, grow the selection to that point, and also hit auto smooth with an angle of 45 degrees on it. So now let's deselect the ones that are sticking out here. If you want to know more about this technique here, you can watch my high poly special on YouTube where I explain that more in depth. But for now, all that we need to know is that we need to have different smoothing groups here, which now, once we have this selection, we're gonna assign to it. Make sure we have them all and then click auto smooth once again. And that tells our chamfer modifier, which we now have back on here with the turbo smooth, that this is where it needs to make some nice divisions so that it actually does the job. So now let's select both our modifiers, turbo smooth, and while pressing Control at the chamfer, and we're gonna cut it. And now it's time to make a selection here for that part that we already have the details on it, and then we're just gonna copy it over to all the other sides. So press Control while being in top view and make sure to have all these polygons here selected. And once we have that, it's time once again to press Control and I to make an inverse selection, and we're just gonna delete it. So now we are left with a perfectly pivoted object that while pressing Shift and being in rotation mode, we can copy around in 90-degree steps here to all sides. So now we just need it here at the top and at the bottom. And once we have that, we can then select any one of them and go to attach and attach them all together. So once we have them attached, we still need to weld them. So we go to vertex mode, select everything, bring up the weld window, and I like to weld at 0.01, or else sometimes it welds some stuff together that shouldn't be welded together. And now we can paste our modifiers that we still had in the clipboard back on here. And you can see that now everything works as intended, and all we have to do is do the same thing here for our grill. So I'm gonna cut out these modifiers and just repeat exactly what we just did, but I'm just gonna go here in isolation mode to make it easier. So pressing Shift while rotating will make a copy of everything. And let's make sure that it's perfectly in 90-degree steps. And now we can just attach them all back together and add our modifiers back on here, including that shell modifier that we need for the thickness. So that leaves us here with a high poly version for our sphere. There are a few details that we can add in Substance Painter later on, but for now let's focus on our head. So let's go back here to the front view and let's start with a cylinder. Oh, and that shows us that we are actually on the wrong folder. So let's select the high poly, switch that to green, and now we can bring up a cylinder here. I have 24 sides on that one. Let's enable angle snap and rotate it over here 90 degree. And I am actually making use now of the align. Let's click on our sphere just to make sure that this is really perfectly centered. And now let's make a copy. Press Shift and drag it to the side. Make a copy of it. Leave it at 24, and that one here in the center, I actually want it to be a little bit higher than that. 32 will do. And now we can make a polygon selection out of that, or an editable poly. And I'm gonna select these vertexes here and just shift them around a little bit. And now with that selection active, we can scale it here. Use the scale tool. And that one here, I also want to scale it, but in. Drag it down, and now we can just bring it up the whole thing. And once again, scale it. So it's really a matter of transforming that original cylinder into the shape that we see there in the background. And that way we have this head as a base shape in no time here. Let's select that edge, double click, and I actually want to chamfer that to make it a little bit rounder. And the same thing here at that edge. Otherwise that's too hard edge, and I'm gonna make one iteration, and on a second thought, I'm gonna have two of them just to make it really nice and round. Let's select these vertexes again and bring it down a bit. Kinda massage it in here, that shape, until we're happy with it. And now let's bring up our material editor and assign that basic black material to it that we already have on the sphere. So next, let's take that cylinder that we were saving out here or copying over. Let's align it also here to the center. Go to front view and let's make a 90-degree rotation here while we have our angle snap on. You can really always leave that on if you want, in most cases. I'm gonna press Alt X to make it transparent, and the same for our head in the background. And now I'm just gonna bring that radius down here until it fits the shape of that camera. But for now, let's go back to the head, and I want to select that edge loop and press Ctrl Backspace to delete both the vertices and the edges. Select that edge loop, bring it down a bit, and that one here at the bottom, let's just bring it a little bit more to the sides here. Make a uniform scale on it, just to reshape that a little bit more according to our reference image. So now let's go back here to that shape or cylinder. We can remove the height segments. So now let's bring the height up so that it actually sticks out. Let's go back to our head. And I want to, before we do that Boolean operation that you're going to see in just a moment, add a few extra edge loops here. So connect it, go to edge constraint and bring that up here. And back to our cylinder here, maybe we bring the radius up a tiny bit. And now it's time to select our cylinder here, the head. Go over to Compound Objects and select Pro Boolean. Under Advanced Options, let's select No Edge Removal. And with Subtraction, we can then say Start Picking and click on the cylinder. Go over to this tab and collapse our Pro Boolean to Editable Poly. And now if you go to Vertex mode and zoom in here, you will see that the Pro Boolean added a bunch of extra vertices in between our main edges from that cylinder that we actually don't want to have. So let's add the Turn to Poly modifier, and that already gets rid of them entirely. If you toggle it, you'll see it. And we can just collapse it, and that already did the whole cleanup for us. Let's switch to polygon mode, select only the one there at the back, go to edge constraint and bring it to the front here on the y-axis. And now right click anywhere in the viewport and select local. Let's get out of our edge constraint and drag that here on the z-axis to the inside a little bit. Let's go over to our scale mode and scale it down. So now we have more of that shape there from our reference already. Scale it a little bit up here. And I'm gonna switch over here to our vertex selection and go back to our view mode. Don't wanna have that local mode all the time. And actually I want to go to a polygon mode with that selection here and click on Make Planar, just to make sure we don't have any smoothing issues. So let's go to vertex and target weld some of these close by vertexes here. We only need to do it on one side because we're gonna use our symmetry. I'm going to select these vertices here with Control and connect them. So that way we put some triangulation there in place. And now I'm just gonna make a ring selection here on these guys and make a connection so that we have some extra edge loop there in the center. And we're also going to connect these vertices here with an edge, just so that we have a little bit more things there to connect it to. And also here on the top, we want to define our edge flow. Let's select these three and also connect it. And now we can make use of our symmetry modifier, flip it and collapse it, and that saves us the work on the right side. So now back to our edge connection. I want to make a ring and connect that just so that we have an extra edge loop here, which I'm gonna scale in order to get a little bit more of a chamfer here. Maybe bring it up again a little bit. So that way it's a little bit more rounder there on the top. And let's continue here with these cylinders that we see there, these antennas. So let's go to our standard primitives and let's just drag some cylinders here in the viewport, or at least one of them. Put it up here 90 degree and let's put it to something like 12 sides. We don't want it to be that highly tessellated. And the next step would be to right click that cylinder, make it also an editable poly so we can actually work with it. And let's go over to our polygon selection for that top face and put an inset on it and just bring it up here. Maybe a little bit further. And also we might just want to add another inset, which then we're going to collapse. On the right side here, collapse. And now with that center vertex, we bring that further up. And that makes it for a nice bevel here. And let's just add another connection here on that ring and also scale it up a little bit. So now we really have a nice antenna going here. Let's make a polygon selection on everything here. Press Alt to deselect the top one and then just press Delete for that cap there at the bottom, which we don't really need to have. And I'm just gonna auto smooth that, Control I, and also auto smooth that here on the top. That's where our clear divisions are, so good to have these in different smoothing groups. Next, let's switch over here to our front view and bring that down a bit here on the y-axis. And also let's go to vertex mode and bring that up a bit here so we don't need to waste any space later on the texture when we unwrap it. And now I'm just gonna drag it a little bit more here to the side because that's where I see it on the reference image there in the background. And we still need two more of these guys, so I'm just gonna press Shift while pulling them in a direction to make copies out of them. And that way we have our three antennas here, and I want to give them the chromey material so that later once we texture we have our nice color ID map for them. I'm gonna go back here to our front view, and now I'm just gonna start with a box here. Let's just drag it here into our viewport, and that way we already have something that we can now use for these lights that we see on the reference. I just want to align it also here to the center of our head. That way we know it's perfectly placed. And now I'm just gonna go over here to our scale tool and just define it a little bit more so that it actually fits in accordance to our reference image. Let's make it a little bit thicker here to the top. And now with Shift pressed, we can make a copy of it because we have two versions. Gonna bring it a little bit more to the front. And now with both selected, I'm gonna take them into isolation view, make editable polys out of them, or at least the one here on the top, and add our chamfer modifier with a standard chamfer. And I am going to delete the one at the bottom and just make a copy of that version here, because that way we don't have to do the work twice. So next, let's press M to bring up our material editor and assign a new material, and let's change it to a red. We can also put up the illumination if we want to give it a bit more of a glow appearance here, at least within 3D Max. Later we're gonna make that all nice in Substance Painter, and I'm just gonna scale it a little bit more here while having that selection active of the two of them. And now I'm gonna select that head, the lights and the antennas, 6 objects, bring up our Scene Explorer, and now I'm gonna right click it, make a copy of everything. So with that active selection of the copied things, we make the low poly active and add it to the active layer. So now if we toggle these two, you will see that our low poly has the head in it, and something got messed up here with that part. Let me go back here. And it looks like the selection for the vertexes was not active anymore for some weird reason. But now we have it back here, because we need that for our unwrap later on for our low poly work. So let's go back to high poly for now, and we can carry on here with some details on that. And now that I look at it, I'm not happy with how this is not as round here as on the reference. That's something that I should have thought of earlier, but I'm just gonna show you how to fix that. Let's cut our modifiers so that we have them in the clipboard, and we need to zoom in here and select these tiny edges and just collapse them. And do the same thing down here. Press Ctrl to select both of them and collapse. And now we make a double click on these edges that we have right there in the corners. And I'm just gonna do the same thing up here so we don't have to do it twice. Once we perform our chamfer operation, so double click on that. And now with these 8 edges in total, we can bring up our chamfer window here, not the modifier, but that tool. And we're just gonna increase the amount here so that it's really nice and round. So let's confirm that. And now we have a bit of a mess here. So while being in edge mode, let's just select these 2 edges, collapse them, and do the same thing here on the opposite side. And now I switch over to vertex mode and target weld. And I'm just gonna target weld these vertexes here so that they are making some sense here in terms of topology and are not really hindering anything here in terms of smoothing, because otherwise you see how it has these weird smoothing issues. So now let's just take these edges, or vertexes, sorry, and connect them so that we don't get this weird overlapping. Next, we have to fix our smoothing groups. So I go to Edge, double click the center edge so we have the complete loop, and I'm gonna auto smooth it once again so that our chamfer modifier and turbo smooth works great later on. And now we just have to do the same thing down here. So we go back to our edge mode and we select these edges. We can do the same thing here already and then just collapse it. Go back to vertex and target weld these things here so that we don't have such a mess there. Just connect them together. And of course, do the same thing here on that side. And you will see how that shading issues disappear as we do that. So now let's go back here to some of these issues where we have the overlap. I'm gonna select that vertex and connect it. And we have to do the same thing here on that side as well. And also here we should do it. And I think I forgot that on the upper part. So after that connection, let's just make another polygon loop here and auto smooth it. And now here, I think I also forgot some things that need some connecting, like these here. And now if we paste back our modifiers, we have a nice and round element there, which before just didn't look like the concept or our reference image. So let's just take the modifiers once again here and cut them, because now what we have to do is go back into our polygon mode, and we want to copy that as we did before so that we have it on all sides with these details. So let's make a selection here once again. You're already familiar with that step from earlier. We're gonna select that, make sure we have exactly that here, and then Control and I and delete the other side that we don't need, or the other sides. And now we can add them back here with our rotate and shift clicked or pressed. And that way we make these perfect copies here that will then just be welded together once we have it. So that was the last one. And now let's just select one, go to attach, and let's make sure that they are all attached together here. Before we switch here to our vertex mode, like right now, and weld it, and I have it at 0.01 once again. And with our modifiers back on here, we have now solved that problem here with this nice element being all round as it should be. And that means we can go back here to our head and start working on these details that we see there on the top of it. I'm gonna make another ring and connect operation here. So we have some extra edge loop right there. And with edge constraint on, I'm gonna bring it down a little bit. So now let's select these two polygons, grow our selection, and I want to give it a different material here, which is the one that we already assigned to the ring earlier. And while we're at it, let's make that a little bit more obvious here on the other material. I'm gonna make it darker and bring the specular level down. And that way we have a bit more visible separation here. So now with these two polygons, I'm gonna make an inset on them. And also I want to get out of edge constraint while we push that up a bit here. Go back to inset, make another one. So that way we also creating these nice loops, and also bring it up a bit on the z-axis. Do it 2 more times. And now we can collapse that one. Go to vertex and select the one in the center, convert it to a polygon selection with control and grow it, and then auto smooth it. So now this is one smoothing group. And I go back to vertex and do the same thing again here with the control and polygon conversion so that we can drag that group up here on the z-axis. Now I'm gonna make a ring selection on that section and assign that chrome material to it. So now we have a bit more separation here in accordance to our reference. And it's time to add details. So I'm gonna go over to edge mode and make these selections here for these rings. And I want to add these rings here as well manually. And that's basically the same procedure that we did on the sphere earlier. Let's make sure we select these edges. When you look at the reference image, you will see that this is where we have our separations. And let's just deselect the ones that we don't want according to the reference. Next thing, you already know it, we're gonna extrude, but before that, let's take a look at our concept and you see how we have different colors on there. So I wanna do that before I extrude. I switch over to vertex, make that a polygon selection and bring up our material editor and assign that chromey material. Press 2 to go back to edge mode, and you can see that these polygons here also need to have that chromey, and these 3 need to have the black one. That's what I see, at least when I look at the concept. And that one here, I want to have chromey as well. And now we can go back to our edge mode by pressing 2 and go ahead here with our extrude operation. And let's just put that 10 to a 0 so it makes it easier then to adjust it here. Don't have to slide all the way down from 10 to 0. So somewhere around here looks about right. And I'm just gonna confirm that. Convert it to a polygon selection, and as usual auto smooth it here with an angle of 45. Now let's select our sphere and copy these modifiers, and we can just paste them here on that selection. And it looks like we got some overlapping here with our chamfer amount. So I'm gonna disable turbo smooth and just see what's going on here. We have to bring that amount down quite a bit so that we don't get this overlapping. Let's toggle turbo smooth back on, and maybe on the chamfer let's try standard, but I prefer the quad chamfer here on that one. So I know I just made it darker here, but I think it's a little bit too dark for you to see what's going on. So let's go back here and brighten that up a bit, that material, and that way it's just easier here to see what we're up to. Let's just toggle these modifiers off for now, and I'm gonna make a ring selection here on that loop, convert it to polygons with control, and actually I want to take that edge loop here as well. So same thing, and now I'm gonna auto smooth it, and if you toggle now the smooth and the chamfer back on, you see that we have a nicer separation there already, due to the way that our smoothing groups tells it that this needs to be chamfered there. So next I'm gonna make a ring selection here, bring up our connection dialog, and I wanna have 2 edges, and actually that slider didn't do anything. I'm just gonna do it manually here. Make a ring selection here, convert it to poly, and add our nice and chromy material. But if you look at the reference, there's another one right on top of it. So I'm gonna do the same thing here by adding 2 extra edge loops, make a ring selection, convert it to polygon, and also add our chromy material here to it. So now click on any of these bright polygons here from the chromy material and click on select ID. And with Alt, we're just gonna deselect the one at the top and now make an inset here. Tweak it so that it should look something like that here. And with that selection active, we add a push modifier and push it outwards. So now right click that push modifier and say collapse to, go to editable poly, grow that selection, auto smooth it. And that way, if we re-enable our chamfer and turbo smooth, we have a nice ring here around it, as seen on our reference image. So next, let's add a few details here. I'm gonna toggle off turbo smooth and chamfer as we are working here on the inside of that camera. Polygon selection and inset here, and I'm gonna collapse it so that we have this all going here to the center. Now I'm gonna make a ring selection here on these outside edges. Let's bring up the connect edge dialog and push it over here with that slider so that it's further there to the outside of that ring. Gonna make another ring selection, convert it to polygon, and add our chromy material to it. So now let's go back to our edge selection here, and let's select the one there in the center, make a ring selection, bring up our connect dialog, gonna put that to 0 everywhere, and make 3 edges here in the center of it. I'm gonna make a ring selection here as well on the chromy part, and I want to have 2 edges here. And we may want to increase the width of it a little bit. And adding a push modifier enables us now to not only push it outside, but also into the inside, which is what we want in that case. I'm gonna collapse it, go to editable poly, convert it to polygons here, and make an auto smooth. And that way we have a nice separation here with our chamfer and turbo smooth. And now let's just go back here and make some selections for these details that we want to add to it here, to the inside of that camera eye. And we need to do that manually for the most parts, aside from the outer ring, which we can just double click to get the full ring. And everything else, we just want to have manual selections here for it. Let's see what else we got on the reference image. It might not be 100% visible, but as long as we get it close enough to what we see, I think we should be fine with that. And with that selection, we can then bring up our extrude dialog again and do as we did before here. We just need to get some depth in here, and then we can convert it to polygon, auto smooth it, and that way we got some nice high poly details in there for that camera eye. I guess I'm just gonna refer to it as the camera eye now. And let's go back here to that segment, make a ring selection on it, and also make a connect here with 4 edges, or edge loops I should say. And now while pressing Alt, let's deselect some of these edges, which will do the same thing at the back side. Let's go to front view and deselect this edge loop here, these 2 edges, or 4 edges if you count the back side. And then let's connect these edges here at these borders. And we want to do the same thing here at the back side. So once we have that, we can then go ahead and do another extrusion, which will then do the same thing as what we did before, which basically just means we have some nice high poly detail information here. I'm gonna confirm that, convert to poly as usual, auto smooth it. And now with this modifier stack on top, you can see that we got some nice details there at the bottom as well. And as a next thing, let's work in that detail there that we see in the background. I'm going to editable poly mode, go to edge selection and use our slice plane here. And that way, if we confirm the slice button, we actually add these edge loops in there. So let's get out of slice plane mode and press Alt here on exactly these edges here. And also here at the back. So that way now if we press Ctrl backspace, we are left only with what we see here. And I'm going to make another ring selection here on that. Deselect these 2 polygons. And now I'm gonna go over here to detach. And I'm gonna detach it as a clone. So now I get out of polygon mode. And just to show you, we have a copy here. And we want to go back here and delete these edges that we just sliced in, and then select that copy that we have there in the background. You may have to double click that to actually make that selection. And now we can push that out here, that selection that we have there, that we detached. And we're gonna collapse that push modifier, go back to polygon mode and inset it. Let's just bring it a little bit further here to the inside. And now with our edge mode, we can make a ring selection, make a connection here. So we have an extra edge loop all around. And now we're gonna add the push modifier and push it to the inside and collapse it and convert that active edge selection to polygons and auto smooth it. And I see a little bit of intersection there. So let's go back to our edges here and push modifier back on and push it a little bit out. So now let's collapse it again. And now with that, we can add our chamfer modifier, put it to unsmoothed edges and adjust our amount here so that it takes it straight from our smoothing groups, and we add the turbo smooth. And that way we have this nice detail added here. I'm going to go back here to editable poly, and I want to make a ring selection here to that center segment. Deselect these two, and now we're going to grow the selection and add that chromey material here right to that center. So now we actually have some color on there as well. And it might look a little bit too soft and wobbly. So let's decrease our amount here, bring it further down. That overlap here won't be visible once we turn our turbo smooth on here in the background. And you see that I'm toggling quite often between turbo smooth on and off. It's because we still often need to make use of our editable poly here at the bottom of it. Like right now, we want to add further details. I'm gonna make an edge selection and convert it to polygon and detach it as a clone here. Same procedure as what we just did. And now with that selection right here, we can delete that edge loop that was already selected, and we want to add a push modifier on top. And now you can see that the geometry there at the bottom is kind of intersecting. So first I'm going to collapse our push modifier, go to edge mode, select that edge loop at the bottom, and while being in front view, let's go to edge constraint and bring that slightly above that detail that we already placed there. And here at the top edge loop, we can bring it down a bit. So that way we make sure that nothing is overlapping later on when we bake the normal map. So let us make a ring connection here so that we have both edge loops at the top and bottom, and then connect it with one intersection each there in the center. Now let's just select all of them also as ring, and we're gonna add 10 horizontal edges here, so that we have some polygons here to work with. And now it would just be a matter of looking once again at our reference, and I'm just gonna start applying some material colors here to that. So I keep checking the reference, and once again I have it here on my second monitor as well, so I don't need to keep zooming out the whole time. Let's add an extra edge connection here, but not with 10, but with 1. Because when I look at the reference, that is a little bit closer by each other. These two here. And now let's just carry on by using our polygon mode. And we can also draw a selection, by the way. I'm just going to go here into our isolation mode. And drawing a selection, and then with Alt we can take some away, and that might speed things up a bit here as well. So now I'm just gonna go ahead, make some steps in here. I mean, that might not be 100% as the reference, but as long as it looks close enough, that is really what we want here for these kinds of details. And for now, all that matters is that we assign our material color here. In that case, I'm just going to use the chromey one for everything. And later we can still change it to a different color. It's really just to separate it out later on, so that we can tell it to select it by ID. Then we invert our selection and just delete all the stuff that's around it. And you'll see in just a moment how exactly we're going to do it, but it's essentially the same workflow that we used on that other detail below it. And for now, I'm just going to go ahead here and make some mosaic pattern here, as much based as possible from what I see on our reference image. And especially here in the back part of it, it might not be that visible. I really tried to look up some references for it, but once again, as long as we make some interesting art here, we have some artistic freedom, I would say. And now comes the part where I was really not able to find much as references go, but we'll just make the best out of it. Almost looks a little bit like Tetris here. So I'm just going to draw a big selection here and then go ahead and deselect the ones at the top and the bottom. And now I'm just going to go and take some away here in the center. And maybe we can go down here. And we can make some interesting patterns here that look like they fit. So now let's assign also our color here. And let's take a quick look around here. I forgot something here. I'm going to select these 5 polygons and assign our black material to it. Comes closer to our reference. And now I'm just going to select any of the white polygons and say select ID, Control I and delete. Same thing that we did before with the other detail. And I'm just going to enable our modifiers there in the background. Make a polygon selection here on these details that we just created. And now with an inset, I'm gonna make one segment here on the outside and add our push modifier and push it back in. So now I'm gonna make another inset here, not too much, and add our push modifier back on, but this time I'm gonna push it out here. Now let's collapse this. And we can grow our selection here and auto smooth it with 45-degree angle. So now with these details here, let's add our chamfer modifier, put it to unsmoothed edges. Gonna bring the amount to 0.1 and 2 segments and gonna add our turbo smooth here. So now let's bring up our material editor. I'm just gonna toggle that off, turbo smooth and chamfer, and assign our default dark material here. And now in element mode, I'm gonna assign that one here that we have for our rings already, because that's what I see on our reference image. That looks like it's the kind of a material. And here in the background, I'm also gonna select these 2 segments here, these elements, and also assign that color. And let's see what else we got. We need to select these edge loops here on the outside for each one that we just added here, the color to. Convert it to polygon. And now just add that black color here so that this edge crease there doesn't actually get that information. And that looks kind of how we don't want to have it. So let's change that to quad chamfer here on our chamfer modifier, which gets rid of it. And now we have our details here in place. And there's only one thing left to do, which is to add some extra edge connection here in the center. And now I'm gonna make an inset here on that segment. Let's scale it so that it looks around that depth here. And now do the same thing here on that side. And now with control, we take these polygons here into a selection. We don't need to grow it actually. We just need to assign a new material to it. And we can then change it here to a blue color. If we want, we can put the self illumination up a bit. So with that active selection, let's grow it once and auto smooth. And with our modifiers back on, that all looks ready to bake. And I just want to take another step here with this detail where we could add a few, or I should say remove a few things to make it closer to our reference. And first of all, I want to give that here the material that we use for our rings. And now I'm just gonna go over here to our edge mode, select these 4, ring it and connect it so that we have some extra polygons to work with. And I'm just gonna select these guys here, press Ctrl to also select them over here and delete it. Now let's go over to border mode. Control will make multiple borders and then we cap it. Go to vertex, select those guys here with Control, so we add multiple ones and connect it. And do the same thing here on that side. Multiple vertex selection and hit connect. And now let's just take these polygons here in polygon mode and add that black material to it. And let's see what it looks like. And now we just need to put our chamfer modifier to quad chamfer so we don't have that color bleeding there. And I want to increase that amount a bit. It's a little bit too hard edged right now. So this here looks better and will bake nicely later on. And now let's just copy these modifiers and add them on our antennas. Paste them on here, and we already set our smoothing groups for them later. So the chamfer modifier picks it up, and that is essentially our high poly. There's not much more to it. And earlier we copied the antennas also in our low poly folder. So let's make it visible here with a scene explorer and select 2 objects each here. So now we can actually position it a little bit better here according to our details that we got. Put it there where it looks like it actually makes sense and not right on one of these extruded edges. And we are moving 2 at a time here. And with that being done, let's take another look here at our low poly sphere. And you can see that it got messed up again. I'm just gonna hide the high poly, and I'm actually gonna make a clone here of that because we're gonna need it once we are working here on our low poly. Let's take that copy into isolation mode, toggle off the modifiers, go to edge mode, and control backspace these edges here that we placed earlier. Let's delete our chamfer modifier, and let's go over to Turbo Smooth, put it to 2 iterations, and let's just collapse the whole stack here as a sphere. And the reason for that is that now we go back to that actual thing that we worked on with the holes on it, and we can also collapse it and make it an editable poly. And now once again we have a reference here. I'm gonna go into border mode. Let me just put that a bit to the side here and use shift and scale once again to pull out some extra edge loops here. And in that case, I want it to be different than on our high poly. So we need to make it from scratch. I'm gonna add another edge loop here and another. Gonna scale that one down a little bit. So we have 3 extra edge loops created. And now I'm just gonna cap it and take that one here and give it one more inset that I'm gonna collapse. So now let's select that vertex here and push it out a slight bit so that we have a nice curvature. And then I'm just gonna auto smooth everything here. So we have 1 smoothing group. So that sphere that we just created here for reference to match these 2, we can reuse it for this kind of a extra sphere that's there in the inside. So let's take it, go over to scale mode, and we just want to scale it down a little bit. So now it's time to already think about our unwrap, and for that I'm going to select our outer sphere again on the low poly. I'm going to show the high poly here for a moment, go in transparency mode, and we want to basically delete the other half of it here. Just select it and delete. And later, after we unwrapped it, we're just gonna copy it back into place on the other side. And for now, we're gonna continue here with that sphere that we were just scaling down a bit. And first, let me make it an editable poly here. And then the same thing here, while we're in top view, we select one of these segments here. Let's just make sure to not have any polygons selected that we don't need. And now with that selection, Control and I, and we delete the rest. And then we are left here with something that once we unwrapped it, we're going to do exactly that here. Just copy and rotate, but for now we won't. So that makes it easier then to really just unwrap what we have here. But in case of that sphere here, the inner sphere, I'm just gonna rotate it, not copy it, 90 degrees so that we better see what we're actually doing here. And I will continue by going over to attach, and we want it to be all one element that we're unwrapping. That just makes it easier. And I'm going to select only one antenna here, or attach only one antenna. And now let's bring up text tools. Very easy to install if you go to that URL up here. And we want to add this checker pattern here. If you click on it twice where it says check, let's go back to our low poly here on top of the head of that cylinder. And let's add an inset that we're gonna bring all the way in here. And now let's just re-enable our high poly so that it shows. And we're gonna push that polygon element up here on the low poly so that our low poly also has a little bit of a height there, same as the high poly has it. But otherwise we don't need that many iterations or edge loops. I'm gonna also delete that second light here on the low poly because we can simply share that later and we save some texture space. Let's bring up our unwrap editor. Let's zoom out and push everything to the right side and make sure you have detach and avoid overlap disabled. On the right side, let's click on select by element. Let's go to polygon mode. And then we're selecting that outer shell and go on quick planar map, followed by a quick peel. And then we can push it over here to the left side and continue with that inner sphere. Also quick planar, quick peel. And at the bottom left, let's go to edge mode, get out of element mode, make a horizontal selection and click on loop UV. And with that selection, we're gonna select align vertically in place, and you see how that straightened everything. Same thing goes for the horizontal lines. Let's make a loop selection and align horizontally in place. And then we can push that piece here also out to the left side so we have it out of the way. Let's switch over here to the polygon mode. And I also want to get out of the select by element mode here on the right side. And then just select these two polygons if you press Ctrl and hit that grow selection button 3 times, followed by quick planar and quick peel. And then we can do the same thing here at the bottom, but I'm just gonna do it for that selection here. These 2 polygons. Also a quick planar and push it out of the way. And then let's carry on here in the center for the camera eye. Quick planar and a quick peel. And then let's switch over to edge mode here. Select the center edge and in the text tools, click on align. That way we have it perfectly horizontally aligned here as we see it there in the 3D viewport. And let's re-enable our select by element and polygon mode. Select the whole head and with Alt we're gonna deselect the parts we already unwrapped and now make a cylindrical unwrap here on the selection that we are left with here in the viewport. Gonna align it to Z. And in our rotation mode, I'm gonna make it so that our edge seam is right there at the back of the head. And I'm gonna uncheck normalize map. And if you zoom out, you'll see it all the way out here. And now we just need to get out of that cylindrical projection, press Ctrl and make a uniform scale back here to a reasonable size. And also push it out of the way. We're gonna rescale it all later so that it's all the same texel ratio. Let's also get out of the select by element mode and make a selection here for the antenna. And I'm gonna do the same thing here, cylindrical, based on the Z align option. And it doesn't really matter where the edge is for it. Let's just push it out of the way and make a quick planar here for the top of it, followed by a quick peel. And also push it somewhere out of the way here. So that already takes care of that. And now let's do the unwrap here for the light. I'm just gonna have this selection here entirely. Deselect the parts here at the back. So we're only having the front parts. Make a quick planar. And the usual, make a quick peel to really relax it. And now grow the selection. Deselect the one we just unwrapped. So we're left with exactly this. And you can also make a quick planar based on the y-axis in that case here. And that way we have a cylindrical unwrap here where it's perfectly unfolded. And we're just gonna carry on with a quick peel here to make sure it's perfectly relaxed. And that one here, the front face, we may want to select these 4 edges and align them so that they are straight and not distorted, both vertically and horizontally. So I don't know why 3D Max does it, but when we do the cylindrical unwrap on a more complex piece, then it sometimes doesn't weld certain vertexes together, like that one here. So let's make a selection, right click and say weld selected. And with that being done, we have everything unfolded. Let's make a selection, rescale elements, and then pack custom to fit it all into our UV square here, which is our later texture map. So now a few things become more evident here, like that checker pattern not being perfectly square. Let's make a loop selection here on that edge loop. And let's drag it up a bit because we want these checker patterns to look as square as possible. Same goes here for the bottom part. Just gonna make a selection for that loop and bring it down. So now you see that it becomes less stretched and more according to how we want it to look like. Let's select that piece here. It's that polygon element and we will barely ever see it, so I'm just gonna scale it down a bit. Let's go over here to the element mode down there at the bottom left. Makes it easier to select things. And let's rearrange it a bit here from what our auto packing was doing earlier. And that won't be the most efficient unwrap ever because we have such few elements here to work with. But we're just gonna try to make it as efficient as possible here within our texture space so that we don't lose too much of it. And for example, we can scale that here up a little bit, that top piece, and we can bring that up here a little bit and just make sure that nothing is intersecting here within our UV shells. And that piece here, the camera eye, we can also bring it up a bit. The further you scale it up, the more resolution we have available on it. But you don't want to scale it up too much so that it gets way more high-res than the other parts. However, let's take these things that belong together and kind of put them together, like our lights and here the antenna. And I think the top part for the antenna is right now stuck here in that geometry. So let's make sure we bring that out of it and also maybe scale it up a bit, put it together here and to the side. And that way we're just making sure we're not wasting too much texture space here. Also, let's take that piece here, scale it up a bit again. And these pieces here, let's just bring them up a bit. And then we have that part here at the bottom, which we can select. And while we're pressing Control, we can vertically scale it up a little bit. Doesn't matter that it has a bit of a distortion if we look at the checker pattern. So now it's time to close our unwrap editor here. Right click it and say collapse all. And it's time to put together what belongs together here. We only have the parts that we wanted to uniquely unwrap. Let's detach them here. And let's get out of element mode and angle snap on, and let's make a copy here of that element here, 180 degree as a copy. And let's reopen Unwrap UVW editor, select that element. Let's be here in our move tool, and then let's put it out of the way by a factor of 1 so that we make sure that this is an element that actually shares the texture information. And now that we collapsed our UV editor, we can go over to vertex mode, go to that center vertex and convert it to polygon and grow 4 times. And that is the side that we already just pushed the UV information out of the way. So that means all that we have to do is detach it as a clone here, these rings or these caps, select them, and then with our snap on, we're gonna rotate it over here, that copy. And now with Shift, we make another copy over here. And the same goes for the top and the bottom cap here. With Shift pressed and 180 degree rotation. And that means we don't have to go back into the UV editor for these parts because we already did that when we copied the first half over. So let's just go over to attach and attach these elements here together on our outer sphere. Go out of the attach mode into vertex and draw a selection over everything and just say weld. So now we have all these parts here properly welded, and I'm just going to go over to transparency mode with Alt X and select the inner part here that we have. And what we want to do is make a copy here first. Copy that one. Now this one we want to push out of the way here by a factor of 1. So let's do the same thing here. And now it will share that information. We can collapse it again. And now with that part here still active, the selection, we're going to proceed with the same thing that we just did for the outer sphere. Just press Shift and copy it over here in 90-degree or 180-degree steps. And now we can also go over here to attach and make sure that everything is one piece, especially after we go over here to vertex again and weld it. So now we have our outer sphere and our inner sphere here unwrapped. And one thing that we still have to do is here on that light, we want to go over here to our high poly, and we can delete the one at the bottom because we're only baking the top one. The one at the bottom shares it, the information. So let's collapse the chamfer modifier that was on top of it. And I'm just going to get out of this self illumination so we see better what's going on. Add a chamfer modifier back on, put it to unsmoothed edges here on our high poly piece. And with that, we can add our turbo smooth on top. And that gives us here our high poly model for it that we still needed. And I'm just going to make a name for it here already, light_high. And while we're at it, I'm going to do the same thing here for our antenna _high. And we can delete these two as well, because once again, they are sharing and only that first piece gets baked. I'm going to call that one here the hat_high. And I'm going to copy that name and select our details that we extracted earlier and paste these names back on there. So that tells Substance Painter later on that these pieces are supposed to be considered one piece to bake. And I'm going to proceed with our body here, body_high. Also copy that name. And this grill here is also part of the body, so I'm going to give it the same name. Part of the same mesh for later when we bake. And now we have to go back to our low poly folder and give each element the exact same name, but with an _low. So let's select our outer sphere. I'm going to call it body_low. And some of our parts here on the head are still attached together. So let's go to element mode, say detach, and we're going to call it head_low in accordance to our head_high. This here would be the light_low. Let's confirm that. And that here is the antenna_low. Make sure you write it exactly as you did the high poly. No uppercase letters and so on, just with the _low. Then we also still have our sphere here in the center that I want to select. And I'm going to call it sphere_low. Confirm that. And I actually want to scale that one down a little bit so that it's more obvious that there is some space in between. And now I'm going to make a clone of it, a copy. And I'm going to call it sphere_high. And now we can just go over, select our high poly folder here and add this model back in there. So that element here now, we didn't have that before. Now we have an actual high poly once we add our turbo smooth on it. We don't need chamfer for it. And the only thing that we still have to do on that one is to give it a new color here. I'm gonna give it maybe a yellow. That's important for our color ID map later on. So now we have the inner sphere here as a high poly, but now we want to make a clone of that, a copy. And we want to scale that copy up a bit. So you have two of these spheres now. Don't get confused. Scale it up so that it intersects here with our grill. And that is important so that it knows later on where the alpha information is supposed to go. Let's copy our body_high name, select that sphere here that intersects with the grill, and paste it back on there, body_high. So this is important so that we have a clear indicator there for our alpha map later on. And I'm gonna go hide our high poly, go back to the low poly. And this box 007 seems to be an empty object. Sometimes that happens, so let's just delete it. And now we still want to copy the unwrapped antenna back into place of the other two antennas. So I'm just gonna center to object here on that one. And now it's easier with shift to just copy it over here. And we can delete the ones that we haven't unwrapped. And just put it exactly into the place where the other one is. So delete the ones that are not unwrapped. And we have to do the same thing here for our light. I'm gonna go also center it to object here, the pivot, so that it's easier than with shift to make a copy of it. Copy that. And now let's make sure we just call that light. And that piece here just antenna, so that it doesn't get confused with our naming convention, because we only want to bake the ones where we actually have a high poly piece for. And with these three here, we just have to add back our unwrap UVW editor, select these pieces, and then with the move tool, enter a 1 in here so that it's also pushed out of the way. And then we can collapse that. And that means that we are almost done here. We have everything unwrapped and the proper naming convention. Now let's select everything here on our low poly, and we're just gonna assign a complete new material to it that we're gonna call Droid, or whatever you wanna call it. Assign it, and that will tell Substance Painter later that this is just one material ID. So now the only other thing we still have to do is give it smoothing groups based on our UV shells on the low poly. Let's select each piece one at a time. Go to Tools, Smoothing Groups from UV Shells, and collapse the modifier stack that results out of it. Collapse all. And we're just gonna work our way here through all these low poly parts. And that way we have the perfect smoothing groups in place so that the normal map works as intended later on. Collapse. You can also watch my Unwrap special episode, by the way, where I'm explaining those things a little bit more in depth. So let's collapse all that here. And the last piece here, the inner sphere, also collapse. And now we have everything finished. We're gonna select our low poly model, go over to export, export selected, and we're just gonna export it here as an FBX. Where you export it to doesn't really matter. I like to keep it all in one folder. I'm gonna call it droid_low and just use the default settings here for our FBX. I'm gonna do the same thing here for our high poly. Export selected and also FBX. In the past I used to export OBJs for high poly, but FBX is actually better, has more information. So let's just finish that, and I hope you liked the tutorial. I'm gonna see you in the Substance Painter part where we're gonna make a nice texture.